Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Revenue Management for Multidimensional Customer Choice. I would now like to introduce your speakers today, Brendan O'Brien, Co-founder and Chief Innovation Officer of Aria, and Jeff Halden, Solution Advisor, Softrax. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Brendan. Please go ahead.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much, Jen. This is Brendan from Aria, and let's get going here. So first of all, let's talk about this migration into recurring revenue and what it fundamentally means. This is the crux of the presentation today, and we're going to be examining it from both a billing, customer care, and overall revenue management standpoint, and also from the standpoint of what this means in terms of the KPIs for measuring your business. So why is this revolution happening? What's driving this movement into recurring revenue? In short, if I can encapsulate the bullets on this slide, it's something that we are seeing customers want across all industries. It's something that we are seeing businesses recognize the benefit of in terms of how they manage and grow their businesses. And it's something that we're seeing investor communities highly reward, both at the individual institutional investor level as well as at the Wall Street level. And the thing to remember about recurring revenue is if you're stepping into it for the first time, the tendency is to believe that what we're talking about is fundamentally just a difference in how I bill my customers, how I get paid for the service I provide. What we endeavor to put forth today is there's actually much more to it than just the bill that you're going to be sending every month or every year for the service that you render to your customers. In recurring revenue, there is an unparalleled level of both flexibility and a benefit around cash flow. If you look at a legacy sales model, and in this example we're using software sold in a traditional license plus maintenance model, you have that basic one-time upfront purchase of X number of seats, and then you have some unknown amount of long-tail annuity-style revenue in the form of the 10, 20, 30% maintenance fee that you charge. But in the recurring revenue world, there are a whole host of ways that you can offer that same exact service, not just one model, but multiple models. In this example, we're taking the exact same service, the exact same software that's being provided, and hypothetically offering it to our customer base in any number of models. We can basically replicate that 10 seats for a relatively fixed fee with a smaller ongoing fee thereafter. We can offer it in a pay-as-you-go based on what's called high watermark usage. How many people used the software this month? 5, I'm going to charge you for 5. Next month it's 7, I charge you for 7. Or you can offer it in a perpetual all-you-can-eat sort of rhythmic, simple subscription, all-you-can-eat buffet model. The point being, you have a whole host of models available to you. It's not one versus the other, and you should feel unencumbered in being able to offer your customer base any number of ways in which they can pay for the same core services that you offer. If we think about the past and compare it to the future, you're looking at the left at a Model T Ford, and one of the famous comments that Henry Ford made was, you can have a Model T in any color you want as long as it's black. Well, obviously those days are over. When you purchase a car today or lease a car today, you get to pick the model, the color, the features, the add-ons that you want. And additionally, more and more so every day, you can actually choose the way in which you pay for it. The automotive industry is moving away from only offering, a one-time traditional purchase model versus a lease model. Now there are a whole bunch of different ways that you can get behind the wheel of a car above and beyond traditional purchase and lease. The real driver here is that the customers are demanding this innovation. Customers are demanding alternative ways to consume the core service, goods and services that you provide. Now, there's some imperatives that come along with this. If you're looking at, again, still at the automotive industry, if a luxury manufacturer like an Audi, for example, wants to go to market with alternative ways of getting people behind the wheel of a car, they're going to be dependent on offering building brand loyalty as the driver for that business. The idea is not to simply make someone the purchaser of an Audi or a Subaru, for example, but to convert them into Audi people or Subaru people who potentially subscribe to a fleet of automobiles and change what they want over the course of time. The imperative of making someone loyal to your brand has this massive benefit of linking them, of tethering them to your core service for a much longer period of time than the lifespan of the initial purchase that they originally made. The best possible litmus test for seeing how this can succeed is Amazon Web Services. I don't know how long the people on this call have been in the technology industry. Presumably many of you are, but it wasn't all that long ago when we were all in the business of building out our data centers and racking boxes and making capital purchases for that hardware and depreciating those purchases over time. Well, that's a very expensive proposition. It's a capital expenditure proposition versus an operational expenditure proposition, and it's a capital expenditure proposition in service of operational need. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And what Amazon Web Services has demonstrated to all of us, thanks to the technology provided by the cloud, is that one can still have access to that same core set of capabilities that any enterprise requires, but to be able to consume it and pay for it in a way that is commensurate with, echoes, mirrors the way in which you use it. If I have the need to service 5 million customers a month, but to be able to protect myself against surges of 10 million a month if I'm particularly successful, then in the old model, the old capital expenditure model of building a rack, I had to purchase enough hardware upfront for 10 million users. Well, with the Amazon Web Service model, if I choose to opt for a particular pricing option, I can opt for an option that says, give me 5 million capacity for 5 million users on a standard basis, but allow me to surge to whatever levels I need and pay for that surge if and only when I require it. This pricing model mirrors the model in which the service is consumed at its core, and that is why it's attractive. So Amazon Web Services and the other platform as a service and infrastructure as a service providers have really been at the vanguard of this, and this is cascading not just in X as a service, but across all industries. We can see it everywhere we go, both B2B and B2C. If you think your industry is immune from this level of disruption, frankly, you're wrong. Uber is a household name, and the reality is it hasn't been around all that long. And Uberification, if you will, is something that every single industry is potentially subject to. So protecting yourself, future-proofing yourself against changes to your industry, changes to the way that your consumers may want to pay for your service today and in the future is absolutely the most important thing that you can consider doing in terms of evaluating and implementing the software needed for these future models. What we're really talking about here is moving from a single-dimensional world to a multi-dimensional world. So I'll attempt to illustrate it with a few simple diagrams. You have your one-dimensional model, the Model T example that I gave you up front, right? You have a product and it is available at a price. Maybe you have a couple of products and they're available at a couple of price points, but that's the traditional way of selling goods and services. What we saw happen in the last decade was this move to subscription. Now, subscription is a way of paying as you go, which is fantastic, and it is the first and arguably the simplest version of recurring revenue. But it is still just a movement from one-dimensionality to two-dimensionality. It is offering this over time. It's adding the time element as an additional dimension, but it is flat, and it is rhythmic. Netflix is a perfect example. I pay for Netflix. I think it's $9.95 a month, and I have an all-you-can-eat access to all of the content that Netflix provides. There's nothing wrong with subscription, but it is only one, and it is the simplest of the recurring revenue models. The next movement is from this two-dimensional model to this three-dimensional model, subscription plus usage, or call it consumption, if you will. In other words, allowing people the option, either as part of how they pay every single month or how they pay only on overage or surge months or years, but giving them the ability to combine simple, rhythmic, flat, predictable subscription pricing with pricing that reflects how much they consume, a pay-per-drink model, if you will, versus a more simplistic all-you-can-eat buffet model. If you think about the way that your cell phone bill is constructed, this is the model in which it is basically constructed. I pay for a flat rhythmic amount that gives me access to X amount of service every single month, but if I cross the line over X, I'm going to get a usage or consumption set of line items on my bill that charge me for that overage, if you will. And that's just one model of subscription plus usage. There are many. But usage-based models, consumption-based models, is where the pendulum has most definitely swung across all industries in the last 3, 4, 5 years. If you will, everything that was old is new again. This is not a new concept, but the telco world has been using it since forever, but it is a concept that is now pervasive across every vertical that we look at. And where we believe the world is going is from this three-dimensional world to this multi-dimensional world, where customers themselves, rather than product managers dictating in advance, customers themselves are demanding more and more latitude regarding how they wish to pay for the service. So rather than the old world of saying, I'm going to offer this in these 2, 3, 4, 5 pricing structures, what about allowing customers to look at the whole array of things that you offer and being able to construct the bundles of things that they want, and within, permutations and guardrails that are appropriate, be able to choose how they pay for it. Do I want to pay for this monthly or quarterly? Do I want to pay for this at this rate under a 3-year contract, or do I want to pay for it under a different rate with no contractual commitment? Rather than pre-building the fixed set of ways in which your customers can acquire, purchase the service you offer, the goods and services you offer, the world we are seeing is one in which the customers are actually dictating it themselves. And the higher those guardrails are, and the fewer predefined options that you offer, the more limited your customer base is. And there are a lot of drivers behind that, and we'll talk about what some of the industry drivers that are coming behind this multidimensional choice wave actually are. Now, when we look at the monetization models inside of recurring revenue, you'll notice that I keep saying recurring revenue, and I've mentioned subscription along the way. The reason is because this is the way that the way the Aria platform views the world. Recurring revenue is an umbrella term. And within that recurring revenue umbrella, off to the upper left here, you see basic subscription. Whether it's monthly or quarterly or annual or on some custom basis, at the end of the day, basic subscription is, again, this all-you-can-eat buffet, a flat price that's on a predictable rhythm that is rhythmic and flat. And that is, at the end of the day, not that difficult to code for or to implement. It might be a challenge if you're coming from a one-time sales model only, but it's not that daunting of a challenge. But the reality is, you can't live, most industries cannot live on basic subscription alone. You need to be able to combine basic subscription with these other components, which in total form the array of recurring revenue business models. I'm talking about things like one-time charges that go above and beyond basic subscription. Look at surge pricing, one-time activation fees, early cancellation fees, ad hoc one-time purchases. If I am subscribing to an online video game that costs me X every single month, I may still want to reach in and say, give me 5,000 gold pieces to spend in the game for an additional $10. Well, that's a one-time purchase. And if you are trying to manage one-time purchases through a traditional model and subscription through a separate stack, you're going to have problems with your customers seeing non-aggregated bills. But the biggest component, where the largest amount of sophistication and complexity lies, is in this world of usage and consumption models. I gave an example before that was a pretty simplistic example of a usage and consumption model. The telco cell phone bill, X dollars per month plus overage, an extra 50 cents per text or whatever it happens to be. That's a known usage and consumption model, the allowance plus overage, but there are many, many others. There are minimum fees, floors, if you will. There are high watermarks. There are pools of available consumption across multiple users that are linked together in a parent-child relationship. All of these different models fall into this large umbrella of consumption, usage and consumption-based pricing models, and usage and consumption-based pricing models form the largest share of the recurring revenue pie. And even more importantly, as you look at these three basic recurring revenue business models that need to act in concert with one another, you must keep in mind that in the global economy, these things need to work in an ever-changing landscape that involves different currencies, different forms of payment, different forms of discounts and promotions, multiple selling channels. People can buy things directly, or they can get them through an assisted channel, like through a sales rep, or over the phone with a customer service representative. All of these things need to be able to work seamlessly together while still supporting the widest possible array of pricing models that fall under the recurring revenue umbrella. So when we talk about this movement into recurring revenue, let's first look at sort of the traditional pure billing way of looking at the world. Somebody buys something, and when they buy something, these are the table stake events, if you will, that occur at the point of purchase. And this applies to both recurring revenue and non-recurring revenue. You figure out how much somebody owes, you generate an invoice or receipt or a statement for that amount, and you swipe a credit card or something along those lines in order to get payment. And sort of an e-commerce view of the world. But if you think about non-recurring revenue business models, what are they all about? Non-recurring revenue business models are always about customer acquisition followed by hopeful potential customer reacquisition. If I go to the Gap and I buy a sweater and I walk out the door with my sweater in hand, I can only properly be called at that point a former customer of the Gap. And the Gap's job is to get me back. And they may try to do that with coupons or rewards programs or their branded credit card or whatever it happens to be. But these are all strategies of reacquisition. But in the recurring revenue world, the beauty of it is that after you go through that initial customer acquisition, your job isn't reacquisition, your job is retention. And customer retention is about elevating customer satisfaction, keeping them with you for as long as possible, hopefully perpetually. In the Aria viewpoint, this customer retention is maximized when you maximize the level of action you apply to all of these moments that happen during the customer life cycle. Because in between the bills, rhythmic bills produced on a monthly or quarterly basis, ad hoc bills, a lot of things can happen inside that customer journey. They may call your call center and complain about a service level agreement and be issued a credit. They may upgrade or downgrade their class of service. They may hit 90% of a threshold of allowable usage before they're going to be asked to pay. These things are what we call events inside of Aria, and the Aria platform is designed to recognize these events when they occur and publish that information immediately out the door to any and all systems or people that need to know about it. This capability is critical because what it does is it keeps that tethering between the service provider and their customer as tight as it possibly can. And in our viewpoint, again, this is the key to maximizing customer retention, and customer retention is the key to success in recurring revenue. Well, there's one other important key to success in recurring revenue, especially if you're new to it, and that is that the KPIs via which you measure the success of your business are going to change. If you're coming from a non-recurring revenue business model, you're likely using KPIs like margin, cost of goods sold to figure out whether or not you're being profitable or not. And in the recurring revenue world, those things can change. And nothing has challenged entrance into the recurring revenue world more in terms of new KPIs they need to wrap their heads around and wrap their systems around than revenue recognition. Whether you're a new entrant into recurring revenue and addressing revenue recognition for the first time, or even if you are already offering recurring revenue recognition in some form or other, the rules are changing around revenue recognition. So I'm going to introduce now Jeff Halden of Softrax to specifically go after some of the concerns around revenue recognition that you really need to start thinking about.
Great. Thank you very much, Brendan. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Just as a little personal background, I was with Ernst & Young and Capgemini for 16 years in both audit and in leading consulting practices, and then worked primarily in high tech in the Bay Area. My role now with Softrax is both on the accounting side as well as working with clients on how we best solve these complex revenue management challenges. Now, Softrax has been in the financial application space since the 90s and has a very strong history in revenue management. We're an industry leader in this space, and hopefully you'll get a little bit of a view of that today. As Brendan noted, there are many business and consumer drivers behind the evolution of customer relationships, consumption models, and monetization. Now, revenue management and financial statement presentation is primarily driven by policies and guidance issued by the FASB, SEC, and other organizations. And right now, new guidance known as ASC 606 and IFRS 15 are driving tremendous change for all public companies as of 1/1/2018 and private businesses as of 1/1/2019. It's an aggressive timeline for most companies, and you certainly need to be well into an assessment of the impact and ideally have a plan for implementation. And ultimately, businesses need to have a platform to evolve for future guidance, in addition to that driven by customer expectations. Now, in terms of the new guidance, the FASB and IASB have jointly developed what they call a 5-step model to follow for managing revenue from contract with customers. Real quick overview. The first step, identifying the contract, is about contract validity, but now also includes things like an assessment of collectability and potential contract combination considerations. The second step determines whether promises are separate obligations and may now include things like future options and rights previously not addressed. The third step, determining the transaction price, would have you also assessing things like variable consideration, financing components, and a lot of other new guidance areas. Then you get to the fourth step and you're allocating the transaction price to individual performance obligations. And now there's been, changes in really how you value things. The concept of fair value, for instance, has changed, and it's now based on a new concept of relative standalone selling prices. You're also dealing with the allocation of discounts, variable consideration, and other elements in this step. And the last step, the fifth step, is about recognizing revenue when or as those performance obligations are satisfied. So you can see in total, there's a lot of change to how revenue is determined, allocated, and recognized. So who's impacted by all of this? Well, the goal of the new guidance is to improve comparability across industries and eliminate the bulk of the industry-specific rules that have driven different approaches to revenue management currently. Now, most industries are impacted by the change in the framework itself, the details of managing performance obligations and revenue recognition, clearly some more than others. But even for those businesses with little revenue adjustment or processing change, the impact of the increased disclosure requirements and financial statement presentation and restatement will present a challenge for those businesses as well. So here's a view of some of the major guidance changes. Sort of a summary here. It's a partial list. Some industries are faced with assessing things like embedded leases and interest elements that they have to carve out in value, and that's all new guidance to their industry. Others, like high-tech companies in the Bay Area that I see all the time, are trying to understand the issue of capitalizing costs that they might have incurred to acquire contracts. Assessing contract modifications, figuring out the new disclosure expectations. Again, it's a very short list here of a lot of impact. The other key takeaway then that I would say is that these new rules also greatly increase the use of judgments and revenue estimates that previously were addressed more specifically in the industry-specific guidance. So what does all this mean? How do you prepare to tackle all these changes? Well, at a very basic level, you need to be thinking about a potentially larger set of performance obligations, different approaches to pricing and multi-element allocations, making estimates and updating them as you get more information about the value and timing of that obligation, and also dealing with downstream contract modifications. So I have a couple slides with some screenshots of how we support these issues to give you, one point of view, but most importantly, you need to make sure that both your current and your planned systems, as well as your business processes, will support them. One thing you'll need to be looking for example, is a system with a lot of flexibility without requiring programming and development of custom rules every time you need to support a business change or support new guidance. Now, the way that Softrax handles this is we create both power and flexibility through the use of templates, which can then be assigned to your transactions, your products, your product classes, any number of ways that are going to make sense for your business. And what that allows you to do is establish standard approaches, multiple configurations, and automate their application as the orders are processed, as well as adjust them on the fly when you need to for those, one-off cases or special considerations. So for example, in this screenshot, even something as standard as revenue forecasting can vary quite a bit. And you may need a combination of methods such as in total, ratable, usage-based, percent complete, milestone, et cetera, as well as dynamic options for, again, those cases that need to be adjusted on the fly. This screenshot is an example of what we call a carve template for separating an item into performance obligations and assigning revenue treatment. So in general, for managing performance obligations, you're going to need a flexible approach to separate them, to create individual obligations. That might be based on standard amounts or percentages. It might be a carve out of an amount from an item. You'll need to be able to allocate the transaction amount to these obligations based on your determined standalone selling prices. You may require functionality to help determine and monitor your standalone selling prices and be able to update your price book for future allocations. You'll need to assign appropriate revenue recognition timing and approach and other factors to each individual performance obligation. And of course, you'll want this to all happen automatically as the orders start flowing into your revenue management system. Now, contract modifications is another interesting area that's new to the revenue guidance, which may be driven even by just a second order, let's say, to the same customer. So you'll have to be able to evaluate whether that subsequent order or orders fundamentally changed or added to your existing performance obligation, and then understand what the appropriate treatment would be across the impacted orders. So for instance, you may be combining and adjusting contracts. You may be terminating the original contract and replacing it, which often require the ability to group contracts and orders, reallocate across them, reforecast revenue, process catch-up adjustments. There's a lot of things that could potentially happen to account for the impact of a modification based on those subsequent orders to the same customer. So thinking about adjustments and modifications in general, and there's a number of examples here, but you may be adding and satisfying conditions, managing different approaches to revenue recognition, adjusting and recalculating your forecasts, maybe pausing and canceling revenue. You've got a client who isn't going to pay their bills, and you need to be able to identify everything for them and pause rev rec in that scenario. Assigning disclosures and other characteristics at various group levels within your contracts. the net is you're going to need a system that can support all these requirements, but also allow you to establish and modify your revenue management processes without, having to go to IT and do some custom development to figure it all out. One way to help track things that you should be focused on day to day, the approach that we utilize is through a workbench dashboard. And we use these and also revenue dashboards to give you a quick view of what's going on, where are the items that you might need to take a closer look at. So for instance, this one is showing a couple revenue items with conditions, sort of in the upper left quadrant. And, you might have a hold condition waiting for customer acceptance, for instance, and nothing's going to happen with that revenue until you release the hold. So, you might have contract elements that haven't processed revenue, which is sort of the missed revenue recognition box in the lower right there. And you want a quick view to be able to see what those are and drill right into them and, understand what's going on. So the workbench approach that we utilize, and I'm sure other people have, their own methodologies, but these components themselves are easily added to or moved around or removed from your workbench. Filters can be added. The net being, you want something that is going to be specific to you. It might be specific to your work group. It might be company-wide. And whenever you launch the application, you have a real quick view to, the things that need attention. And then, of course, regular reporting, such as a deferred revenue waterfall. We utilize an interactive BI approach that can really make your life easier. So, for instance, this report can include whatever filters and selection criteria you like, different views, different data components, and you interact with it directly through just, point and click. I can right-click down on that schedule on the bottom section there and have a quarterly view or an annual view. I can use the slider in the middle section to view more periods at a time or fewer periods at a time. I can switch between, various sets of books that I might be managing, or look from a customer view or a regional view. So, what we've found is, of course, the reporting and the workbenches can fundamentally drive and really have tremendous optimization for, the day-to-day activities that you need to deal with in managing revenue. So I know that's a lot of information, and we're kind of moving through things a little bit quickly here. I wanted to get back to a key message, which is fundamentally you need to get going. I'm always surprised. I still hear that a lot of companies are behind. They're sort of scrambling, and they may be scrambling to get their Q1 numbers right, Q1 2018, and then also deal with the prior year cumulative effect adjustments that they're going to need to show in those financials. So, wherever you are right now, you should be working with your auditors, updating your systems and business processes, perhaps deploying best-of-breed solutions like Softrax and Aria, which you can do without, a rip and replace of a major enterprise-wide solution. Wherever you are in the process, you don't want to stand out in your market as being the company that didn't figure it out, the company that had to delay your disclosures, delay your financial statements, and stand out sort of in a negative way in that regard. With that, Brandon, I will hand it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. And boy, that certainly was a lot of information, and I'm trying to put myself in the position of our audience here, and I know that that's a lot of daunting stuff. The world is changing. The guidance on revenue recognition is changing. What customers are demanding is changing across all industries. The good news is that, as Jeff said, there are best-of-breed platforms that are designed to fix these problems for you, and they do that. Both Softrax and Aria are examples of that in a couple of ways. One, they put the power of change in the hand of business users. In other words, taking engineering out of the equation of necessity for getting these things actually implemented. And they do that using reusable template building block approaches to managing your business. It might be hard to make the initial transition, but once you've made it, Aria and Softrax are both designed to really make it something that you can maintain at the business user level going forward. While you have revenue recognition driving a whole host of new sophisticated demands on the back-end financial reporting side, again, you have a push toward this customer-driven, multidimensional pricing and selling and billing model across all verticals, driving it on the front end. So to kind of wrap up here, I wanted to touch base on some of the key technologies that are embedded into the Aria platform from its inception that enable this capability. So if we kind of bisect that dodecahedron or whatever it happens to be and look at what's inside the core of Aria in order to make this all possible, I'd like to highlight a couple of things. First, one thing that we refer to as omni-node technology. What I mean here is when you look at both your product catalog, all the array of things that you offer and the various permutations and combinations and exclusions that apply to those members of your product catalog, that can require some significant sophistication. Aria offers a product catalog that is highly configurable, that encapsulates the rules via which people can and cannot purchase, and at what price point and what currencies, and with what dependencies and what exclusions they can purchase the services that you offer. What we're endeavoring to do here is to centralize these rules so that no matter how you sell, through a CRM, through a CSR, through a self-service portal, these rules are always adhered to, and you can kind of keep those front ends as dumb as possible, while your back end, your centralized back end, is as smart as possible. Again, this is to help remove engineers from the equation. And the same applies to account management, especially in a B2B world, but also in a B2C world. It's not as simple as saying, I have one customer, I sell them their stuff, they pay for it or they don't. Very often you're selling to customers that are complex in their very structure. I can sell to a corporate entity which has divisions and retail outlets and users that stack in a hierarchy. If I'm selling an Internet of Things type of offering, I need to be able to understand what the device is versus who the consumer of the device is, the user of the device is. And Aria's omni-node technology allows all of these nodes to work in concert with one another and to do so, again, without engineers being required to solve the problem for you. Additionally, we have this concept of active orchestration. If you think about that pretty constellation slide that I showed earlier where all these moments, these events were occurring during the customer lifecycle, that's really just a way of visualizing the active orchestration capability that I'm talking about. As a cloud-based system, the way that one interacts with Aria is the same as it is with every cloud-based system primarily, meaning it's via the web service API. But an API is a passive instrument. An API is a phone sitting on a desk waiting to be called to extract information from it or to give it something to do, something to ingest. That's fine, but in an enterprise solution, especially in a best-of-breed solution where you have multiple systems that need to stay in tight synchronization with one another, it is insufficient to do it well. And if you do without this kind of capability, you're going to be writing a lot of connective tissue code on your own. Aria is designed to orchestrate all of these moving parts between Aria and other systems like Softrax, like your CRM, like your e-commerce portal, like your general ledger, and keep these things in tight synchronization by pushing data actively out the door based on events that occur during that customer lifecycle. Additionally, we have layered what we call our workflow product on top of the core product. What this is a way for you to encapsulate utterly proprietary business rules. You may have a rule that says if someone purchases 3 of this item during the month of January, I therefore want to give them 15% off their next 2 purchases as long as those things occur by the end of May. It's not an uncommon kind of rule, and no system is going to have a button that you click to turn on a rule like that, but Aria provides a business process automation layer in our workflow product that allows you to encapsulate these rules. And if you're a business user that can construct a Visio diagram that describes a process along these lines, you can use our workflow layer to completely embed your business rules in the platform. Now, all of this obviously has to be delivered via cloud connectivity, and at the end of the day, you don't want to be doing all of this at the exclusion of the same enterprise level of capability that traditional monolithic on-premise systems offered. So Aria is built on a true enterprise-grade architecture with SLAs, throughput, availability, surge protection that you can usually only expect from building your own very expensive in-house stack. So the age of multidimensional customer choice is upon us. It has consequences for how you go to market, how your customers interact with you, how they buy from you, and it has consequences for how you manage and measure the success of your business on the back end through things like potentially sophisticated modern revenue recognition guidance. And it is time to adapt. And again, this journey is non-trivial at first. We endeavor to make it as easy for you as possible. But as Jeff said, the time to get started is now. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending and hand it over to Jen for any questions that have come through the Q&A panel.
Great. Thank you, Brendan. We do have some questions coming through, and ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to submit a question, again, using the Q&A panel on your right, please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Anything we're unable to answer on today's call, we will follow up in an email. It looks like our first question is for Jeff. What are the common challenges you are seeing for companies striving to adopt the new revenue standard?
Okay, great. Boy, I would say it differs by industry in a lot of respects. I may have mentioned that some companies have contracts with embedded leases, for instance, and that's a real challenge. They may have interest elements with now that have a time value of money that they have to separate out, determine what that valuation is, and effectively pull that out of the contract and now recognize the fact that that really may be interest income, not, regular contract revenue. Others have long-term contracts that, now have, they need to look at capitalizing commission costs and other costs to acquire. A lot of companies, are just trying to understand all the disclosure requirements. There's a lot of disclosure requirements around disaggregation of revenue, presenting your revenue in different ways that are more meaningful to the user community, but also more onerous for you to create. And then that whole issue of managing downstream modifications to contracts, you need to have that, ability to adjust after the fact, so to speak.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our next question is for Brendan. How do you increase choice without adding complexity?
Well, I'll give a couple of examples, but I would say that there's a balance that needs to be struck. Basically, when we talk about increasing customer choice, we're also simultaneously, the flip side of that coin is about reducing the level of pre-configuration that is required on the part of product managers. So rather than product managers being asked to construct every conceivable permutation in advance of how your goods and services are bundled together in order to be purchased. Not that you shouldn't be allowed to do that if you wish to, but in order to increase customer choice, you need to reduce your thinking to the building blocks of core services and effectively push that onus out the door onto the customer's plate to bundle these things themselves. Now, when they do that, there is going to be some complexity or some sophistication around how these things are ultimately going to be priced. You don't know in advance how a given customer is going to put a bunch of things together, what contractual commitments they're willing to come up with, what discounts or promotions they may apply. So you have to have some guardrails that are built in advance that make sure that they stay on the track. But once you do that, the complexity is really a part of the buyer's journey rather than part of the product manager's journey. So I would actually argue that increasing customer choice actually decreases complexity from a product management standpoint and a product marketing standpoint, and really puts it on the plate of the customer themselves.
Thank you, Brendan. And for Jeff, how do you guys support both the current revenue guidance and the new guidance being adopted? Can you do both at the same time?
Yeah, great question. We do manage both concurrently. What we allow you to do is establish really as many different sets of books as you like. So a lot of companies that, have the tool implemented now and are sort of, looking ahead to what their numbers are going to look like in 2018 and beyond, they're managing their current set of books. They're managing an ASC 606 set of books. You may also, as companies typically do, have a non-GAAP set of books, and you can set those up and then effectively have all of your transactions automatically replicated in a second set of books with those different rules applied to them. So in that way, you can see both current and future views of your data, have the accounting book as one of your selection criteria on the dashboards and the reports, and sort of, really easily flip back and forth and get a view of now versus maybe next year.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like the next question would be for Brendan. What teams are driving and then managing these efforts, and who should?
So that's an interesting question, and let me answer it by speaking to the more distant past, the more recent past, and the current situation. If anybody on the line has read Crossing the Chasm, the Jeffrey Moore book, the big takeaway there is that when you look at the adoption of any new disruptive technology or service offering, the first consumers of it are those early adopters. And those early adopters tend to be, especially in the technology world with technology offerings, they tend to be technologists. So what I would say is when I look at how Aria engaged with our customers 6-7 years ago, we were looking at evaluators, buyers who were centered on technology. And that made some sense. A, they were the early adopters of new cloud-based billing technology. And B, at the end of the day, this was going to be something that they owned, if you will. They managed, and they'd been accustomed to owning it. They were coming from owning the on-premise billing system that they've been maintaining and layering Frankenstein monster capability on for years. So they were very comfortable with moving to new technologies. They were your early adopters, so it was largely a technology buyer at that point in time. What we have seen more recently is it has become more and more of the finance office that's done it. Obviously, as we've said repeatedly today, there are ramifications to how you measure your business, not to mention how much money you make fundamentally. So it makes a lot of sense that the finance buyer has now, at least a couple of years ago, stepped closer to the fore and said, this is something I want to own. And they should be part of that decision, especially if you're moving into recurring revenue for the first time, because there are institutional challenges above and beyond technology challenges that are part and parcel of that movement. So having the finance buyer at the table is also critical. But more and more today, and this is how the Crossing the Chasm model is actually working. Cloud-based technologies in general, cloud-based billing technologies and reporting technologies and revenue recognition technologies are no longer considered this crazy edge type of technology. They are part of the mainstream. And when they become part of the mainstream, when anything becomes part of the mainstream, your second and third wave of adopters start to come to the table. people. And when you're talking about technology, that second and third wave of adopters are business users. So the business users for a revenue management, recurring revenue management system of any kind are likely to be product managers, line of business managers, and more, those are the people that we are seeing as part of the evaluation teams, and that's as it should be. And by the way, I think that that's critical to success. At the end of the day, these kinds of things are the beating heart of your business, and you have a lot of internal stakeholders. Finance is a stakeholder, IT is a stakeholder, product management and marketing are stakeholders. They should be at the table. So frankly, I'm quite glad to see that the current group includes that wider array of evaluators and buyers than it did just a few years ago.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the questions we have time for today. I would like to thank our speakers, Brendan and Jeff. And ladies and gentlemen, that will conclude today's webcast. You may now disconnect. Again, if we did not get to your question on today's call, we will follow up with an email. Thank you and have a great day.